Hello, folks, and welcome to Neighbor. I'm your host for today, Daniel Kasnitz, and we're very pleased to have with us Rabbi Tom Heyn, who is a rabbi for the Brattleboro area Jewish community. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Well, let's start right in, and I wonder where was it that you grew up, and what's your background?
Well, I'm originally from Baltimore, and grew up there. Went to school a couple years in New Jersey, Drew University, and then moved out to the San Francisco Bay Area. Lived there for about 12 years, and then moved to Milwaukee, where I finished my degree, my undergraduate degree, and from there went to Israel. I was accepted into rabbinical school. Spent the first year of my studies in Jerusalem, and then the remaining 4 years at the Hebrew Union College, its campus in Cincinnati.
Wow.
Where I was for about 15 years before coming here to Brattleboro.
And what did you do while you were in Cincinnati?
Well, I was raised in a Reformed Jewish family in Baltimore, but I found myself in my teenage years to be a spiritual seeker. Became a vegetarian, became acquainted with the writings of Mahatma Gandhi and other thinkers in the East. And I was not aware that spirituality could be found in Judaism. I thought it was just a place you go and sit in a boring service and then you go home. So I studied Eastern philosophy and religion and practiced and studied it in ashram in the San Francisco Bay Area for 10 years.
And so after that in Cincinnati, what was it that brought you back to actively being a rabbi?
Well, I was still in San Francisco at the time, and joined a synagogue mostly for social reasons, for networking reasons, and found that, yeah, there was, I began to sense that there was something spiritual about it. Spoke to a young rabbi there who recommended a couple of books about Jewish mysticism and Kabbalah, and that's when I realized, wow, I could find spirituality in my own tradition.
And then how did the move from Cincinnati to Brattleboro wind up happening, and when did that happen?
Well, going back to San Francisco, he recommended at some point in time, I learned Hebrew, became a bar mitzvah at the age of 30, and then somebody said, you know, you should become a rabbi. And I thought, well, that's kind of a crazy idea. I still needed to finish my undergraduate degree. I was still learning Hebrew and knew very little about other aspects of Jewish tradition. But I realized that if I wanted to take it seriously, I wanted to be able to study it as more than just a hobby on the side. So I thought, well, if I were to go to rabbinical school and enroll and you know, immerse myself in Jewish studies, that's really how I could really get the most and learn the most that was possible at that point in time in my life. So I was accepted into rabbinical school, and my learning curve was about as steep as that ski slope I went up this morning. And
Over there, the ski jump?
The ski jump in Brattleboro, right.
Yeah.
And then I wasn't sure I wanted to be a congregational rabbi because I felt that my interests were still in the area of Jewish mysticism and Kabbalah, and to have to worry about the myriad other things that one would have to, you know and understand and you know, have to deal with in a congregation. I chose to work as a chaplain in a long-term care facility and as an educator. But after about 10 years of that, I felt, you know, I had remembered my days in the ashram when we experienced a sense of, when there was a real spiritual community. And we were more than a group of individuals. There was a real sense of a cohesive sense of community where the focus was a spiritual one. And I began to yearn for that again, only this time in a Jewish context. And I knew that it was possible. And I've seen it done in other communities and would have loved to have joined one. But being trained as a rabbi, I realized I'd have to find one and participate in it and help it to develop even further, only this time in a role as a spiritual leader. So I began to consider taking a pulpit in any community that would have me. There are too many rabbis in Cincinnati because many of them graduate and they stick around like I did. So I found that there was an opening here in Brattleboro, and I had only been in Vermont many years ago as a camp counselor at the Farm and Wilderness Foundation, and I just loved the mountains. I loved everything about Vermont. And the more I learned about Brattleboro, not only is there the beautiful natural scenery in the mountains here, but the culture is quite unique. There's a very highly developed social consciousness. There are many, many artists and musicians and environmentalists and activists here. I thought, wow, what a perfect place. And I have to mention, besides that, the name of the congregation is Shir Heharim, which means Song of the Mountains. And because music is very central to my work as a rabbi, and I understand the importance of music and spirituality, I thought this would be a perfect place.
Can you speak a little bit more about music in your practice and what your background is as a musician and how you use music?
Sure. When I was growing up in Baltimore, I learned to play the keyboard, piano, studying at the Peabody Institute. And although I never really mastered classical music and sight reading, I always had an ear, and I would hear a song and be able to figure it out without too much trouble. And in the course of the time that I spent at the ashram, I ended up leading kirtan, which is an Indian form of devotional music. Many other religions have their own unique forms of devotional religious music. The Sufi tradition has Qawwali music. Many people have heard of Nusrat Fateh Ali Khan. And there are probably one of the best known and universally known and practiced form of devotional music is call response music. Right. So the music is not all that intricate. It's very simple, in fact, and very repetitive. But it helps to induce a very meditative state of mind. And so I'm a big fan of that kind of music and find that there's quite a lot of it in Jewish music as well. But I love Jewish music probably is the broadest genre of any kind of music because you find Jewish music in countries around the globe in all different styles, in all different languages. You've even got, reggae, beatbox, hip-hop Jewish music. So it's just incredible, the diversity of it. And I love it all. And I play what I can on the keyboard. I tried to learn the guitar once and accepted a job as a song leader in a summer camp just so that I could learn the guitar. And I ended up having to bring my keyboard around with me because I just never picked it up. But what I love to do the most is recruit other musicians, like yourself, and try to bring them together and to play and to have a very participatory kind of spiritual experience that's connected to music, that is a non-rational means of accessing and giving expression to our natural spiritual impulses.
So it's your experience that music can bring us to experiences or help us access states that other disciplines might not reach.
Absolutely. No doubt about it.
And how do you actively use it now in your services?
Well, many of the prayers in a service, most of them in Hebrew, can be sung. There are just hundreds, if not thousands, of melodies for all the prayers throughout the Jewish liturgy. And, in the last decade or two, there are many contemporary songwriters that have written beautiful melodies for the Hebrew prayers as well as the English interpretations of them. So there are so many choices. And when it comes to planning out a prayer service, and you can bring in instrumentation and percussion and create a real experience that's different from the one I had growing up.
So it sounds like music is very much integrated throughout service.
Absolutely.
As opposed to, something at the beginning or something at the end.
Right.
What's your experience like now? How long have you been with the Brattleboro area Jewish community, and how have you found being in Brattleboro and with this community? And what do you find that the BAJC brings to Brattleboro?
Well, I started in July of 2010.
So not quite a
So
year.
at this point, it's been about 9 months. And although the Brattleboro area Jewish community has been in existence for the last 40 years, and they've had a history of having a few rabbis throughout different periods in their history, as well as lay leaders. One that had served for 10 years until recently was very beloved and did many wonderful things for the community. The community has had a role to play in the broader community here, bringing a greater awareness to Judaism, to its holidays, having a seat at the table for the interfaith associations that exist here, and helping to support the many, many Jews who, most of whom are not affiliated, and most of whom are very secular in their orientation.
And describe a bit, what are the various offerings at the Brattleboro area Jewish community? What type of programs are available, and how do people participate?
Many of our programs are related to the holidays that occur throughout the year. We have Passover Seders, and we have other activities and classes related to each of the holidays. Hanukkah was a great time. The High Holy Days is one of the times of the year when a lot of the unaffiliated Jews will come to a service. Other activities, we have a Jewish religious school, a Hebrew school for our children. We have about 36 to 40 children enrolled in our school. We meet Monday afternoons throughout the school year.
And what is the primary function of the Hebrew school?
Of course, it's to transmit our tradition and heritage and our values to our children. They have the opportunities to learn Hebrew, learn about the Jewish holidays, and to prepare for a rite of passage that many will go through at the age of 12 or 13, the bar mitzvah for boys or the bat mitzvah for girls. So at one of the ceremonies for when a person becomes a bar or bat mitzvah, that means a daughter or son of the commandment, that means they become an adult. They become responsible for their own actions. And one of the ceremonies that is usually an integral part of that rite of passage is being able to lead a prayer service. Many of these prayers are in Hebrew. And being able to read from the Torah, which, as we know, is the 5 books of Moses, usually written in the form of a scroll by a scribe on a parchment scroll. And there are no vowels.
Written in Hebrew.
Written in Hebrew, so that the students have to learn how to read the Hebrew, be able to read it without the vowels, and to be able to often chant it, following a very specific, precise form of a trope or cantillation. And there are other blessings and prayers they need to learn, and rituals. They also will give a speech or a Devar Torah, a commentary on the weekly Torah portion, and usually use that as an opportunity to make a personal statement about something that's important or meaningful to them. So that's the function of the religious school. We have other activities and classes throughout the year, and services on a regular basis.
Yeah, and when are the regular services, and what are they?
Because it's a small congregation that consists of about 100 families, it's not so, and because I'm actually a part-time rabbi, it's not feasible for us to have a service on the same day every week. So the most important service during the week for us is the Sabbath. So one week we'll have the Sabbath evening, Shabbat evening service on Friday. And the following week we'll have a Shabbat morning service on a Saturday morning. So we usually alternate between Fridays and Saturdays. Our service schedule can be easily found on our website.
And what is
Shall I tell you what that is?
Yeah, what is the website?
BAJCvermont.org.
So
that
Vermont
stands for
spelled out?
Brattleboro Area Jewish Community, Vermont.
Okay, great.
But these days you can just do a Google search or
Right.
search on any search engine and find the synagogue or congregation or rabbi in Brattleboro.
And if someone is interested in attending services, do they need to contact somebody ahead of time? Can they just come in? And if someone wanted to contact you directly, how would they get a hold of you?
There's no need to respond, RSVP. If they choose to come to a service, they're welcome, although they might want to call ahead just to make sure that it's being held on that day,
right.
that it hasn't been snowed out, or that there wasn't a mistake on the calendar. So if they wanted to contact BAJC, they can do that by email from the website.
Okay.
Or they can email me directly, which is, and my email address is even easier to remember. I have my own website, rabbitom.com.
Okay.
And so you can just send a message to me at tom@rabbitom.com or rabbi@rabbitom.com, or just go to the website and click on contact.
Oh, great. That's great. Are there any particular projects that you're working on now, either with BAGC or outside, that you'd like people to know about?
Got a full slate of activities and classes coming up related to the holiday that's approaching soon, at least from this point in time. We've got Passover. We've got a Passover cooking class. We've got a class on Seders for postmodern families. And I should say that just about every family in this age is a postmodern family. The families are not as traditional as
right.
they once were, where there's always a father and a mother and 2.5 kids. And
right.
so, Seders have to change, and the symbols and the traditions have to be relevant to the age that we live in, and the changing families, the changing culture.
Can you describe what a Seder is?
Sure. A Seder is usually a meal that has a particular order during which we tell the story of the Exodus. The word Seder actually means, in Hebrew, it means order. Just like a prayer book is a Siddur. It has the prayers arranged in a certain order.
Okay.
So a Passover Seder usually has certain elements that are followed in the course of the service or the Seder that are intended to teach us, and especially our children.
Yeah, now that you've been in Brattleboro for a while, how do you find it, both professionally and personally?
It's wonderful. I think it's what I had always yearned for. When it comes to the opportunity to build community, I think this is a very receptive community, very spiritually minded, open to alternative ways of living, and that's a challenge, but also an opportunity. Many folks are not real friendly toward organized religion, very independent-minded here, very progressive and liberal in their way of thinking, which might not bode well for an organized religious institution. But we're not all that organized anyway. And I think we're open to finding, what's most important for me is to find how these ancient traditions and rituals can be meaningful and useful and relevant to us today. And I think Brattleboro is really on the cutting edge of where the rest of the country is as far as thinking ahead and realizing the importance of the environment and the fact that we are responsible for one another. There's a very strong social conscience
right.
here. And I think I think Jewish values lend themselves to that. I think that's been central to Judaism for eons, this idea of tikkun olam, which means repairing the world. And that's the Hebrew word for it, but I think many folks in this community have internalized this value, don't see it necessarily as a Jewish value. And it's not uniquely a Jewish value, but it is central to the Jewish tradition. And I think once we begin to build bridges and see how what we're doing is consistent with what's been done for a long time, but also I think what Judaism brings to our efforts in this, in trying to repair the world, is that it brings a spiritual dimension to it as well. I think it's very easy for us to lose sight of that. And when we lose sight of ritual and tradition, we become very focused on the here and now, which is important. But we might lose sight of the fact that there's just a broader reality that encompasses everything and that is central to the connection that we have with one another and with all creatures. And I think that's ultimately a spiritual dimension.
It's interesting that you mentioned the spirituality of the area, because if you look at statistics of attendance at religious institutions, many people draw the conclusion that this is a very secular area.
Well, that very fact fascinates me, because I noticed, aside from being at the West Village Meeting Hall, All Souls Church, for the High Holy Days, when when there were maybe 150 Jews there, all in one room, a few weeks after that I went to a teaching by a Buddhist teacher that came to town, and who came to town, and there were about 200 Jews, mostly Jews, there, Jewish Buddhists.
Right.
And that fascinates me, because having studied Eastern religion and Buddhism very seriously, and realizing that many, many people in these Buddhist communities are Jewish,
right.
There's a reason for that. And it has something to do with the search, not being quite satisfied with the status quo.
And is that sort of integral to Judaism?
Absolutely.
Can you speak a little bit about that? Because I think that's a little different than some people may know.
Yeah, I believe that's really the essence of the Jewish tradition, is this iconoclastic spirit. Many people think that the contribution that Judaism brought to the world was monotheism, but that wasn't really the case, because there were some monotheistic trends in other religions, including the Egyptian religions, where they had all the gods and goddesses, but there was a pharaoh that came along that tried to promote a monotheistic religion.
Right.
He wasn't successful, but we might have picked up where he left off.
Right.
But what I believe we did bring, our contribution to the world, was could be summed up in one word, I believe: chutzpah, which means guts and brashness,
right.
A willingness to question and to challenge authority. And I think the greatest role model was the first Jew, and that is Abraham. And there's a story in the Midrash, not in the Torah, but in the stories that were developed by the rabbis after the Torah was written, in which Abraham was a young man or a boy working in his father's shop. His father made idols, and when his father was going out to lunch one day, he said, "What's the point of all this?" He smashed all the idols and left the stick in the hand of the biggest idol. And when his father got back, he couldn't believe what he had seen, and Abraham just pointed and said, "Look, he did it." And his father said, "That's ridiculous. You know these idols can't do anything." And Abraham said, "Well, yeah. And then why are you selling these to all these people who pray to them and expect them to answer their prayers?" So I think that's a wonderful story that symbolizes this spirit that not to accept what others believe to be true, and to question and to challenge. And I believe that has found its way from one generation to the next. I think Moses too was a good example of that. And getting angry at the people for worshiping a calf. Trying to create something solid out of this belief, out of really this what we call God. Really, we can't form an image, not even a mental image, of what this is. This nameless, formless being. We even have trouble calling it anything, even a being, because it so eludes our understanding. But I believe it's this unity and this sense of oneness that connects all things. And that's what we call God. But it's become so concretized by this natural human impulse to try to bring something down to our level of understanding.
Right.
That now when we say God, people have this image of a man in the sky or something else that they don't believe in.
Right.
But the God that most people don't believe in, I don't believe in either.
Right.
Because it's just some mental image that they formed. And so it's a lot like Buddhism in that way, which realizes that that nothing is permanent.
Right.
No thing is permanent. And having studied the Kabbalah, I understand that the Kabbalists knew that as well, and they understood that there was this creator God, but even that God was secondary to what they called Ein Sof, which means without limit, without end, something that cannot be held or grasped, even with the mind.
So does this sort of double whammy of God that is impossible to conceptualize and almost a challenge or charge to learn and think, do some folks find that intimidating? It's not a comfortable dogma just handed down. It's not you can't just follow the directions, if you will.
That's right. That's really challenging. First of all, you've got the people that want the ritual, something they can grasp and follow. And so Judaism has plenty of that, as does any religion. But then you've got all the people that say, that's not for me. But actually, they're the ones who are more faithful to the spirit of Judaism because they reject the concrete forms and images.
Right.
What they don't realize that they are really the true heirs of the spirit of our tradition, because it's one that rejects all form.
Right. Although it does seem that there is use for the rote, for the form, in helping people have deeper experiences.
That's right.
So it's not a rejection entirely.
That's right. Judaism is also very good at recognizing, as are all religions, that we are human.
Right.
And we're fallible, and we need something to grasp onto. But the point is that we use the form so that we might eventually transcend it.
Right. It's a little paradoxical.
And go beyond it.
Yeah.
In fact, that's the purpose of human life, is not just to survive just for our own survival's sake. Mm-hmm. And that's the true for Judaism as well, that we hope to survive as a Jewish people, not only so that we can survive, for survival for its own sake, but for some higher purpose, so that we might be able to go beyond ourselves in some way, and to be a light unto the nations, but so that eventually our purpose, God willing, might one day be fulfilled, so that our existence, as we know it today, is no longer necessary. That idea is very threatening to most people. Right. So survival is good.
Right.
Survival is good.
Wow.
But we have to always realize that it's for our purpose is ultimately to transcend the form and to transcend what we know to be now, what we know to be.
Again, that learning and growth.
Growing and reaching beyond ourselves, exactly.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. We've been speaking with Rabbi Tom Heyn. I'm Daniel Kasnitz, and you've been watching Neighbor to Neighbor. And thank you very much for watching, and we hope that you'll tune in again next week.